For the first time, any British merchant was given permission to trade in India. Before 1813, there was only one private organization, there was only one company, that is English East India Company, had the power to trade in India. That was trade monopolism of English East India Company. But by this act, except two things, trade with China, trade with tea leaves, except these two trade activities, in remaining business activities, all British merchants were given the permission to come India, to have wealth in India and to trade in India. So hence that 90% of trade monopoly of the English East India Company was abolished by this act. For the first time by this act, the Christian missionaries were allowed to come India to establish educational institutions and to introduce English medium system in India, and also to aim the spreading of Christianity in India. Christian missionaries were allowed first time in India, and they were given permission to establish educational institutions to promote English medium system and to promote Christianity in India. That is the main objective behind giving the permission of Christian missionaries. Why the Christian missionaries were given permission to enter India? There are two reasons behind that. One, to establish English medium schools, to promote English medium, and to promote Christianity. Christian missionaries were allowed in India. For the first time, the British government had allocated 1 lakh rupee in budget for the improvement of Indian education system. It is very important thing, allocating 1 lakh rupees in budget to promote the Indian education system, means to introduce English medium system in India. So 1813 Act was the first act which benefits the Indians directly, but it was came into existence after 1830. 1813 Act, by the 1813 Charter Act, 1 lakh rupees were allocated in budget for every year for the improvement of Indian education system. But it actually came into existence after 1830. So this is the first act which benefits the Indians directly by allocating 1 lakh rupees in budget to improve the Indian education system. For the first time, Indians, the native Indians, were allowed to get jobs in English East India Company. Indians were allowed to get jobs in English East India Company. So two benefits were happened to the Indians by this act. One, allocating 1 lakh rupees to improve Indian education system and to get direct jobs in English East India Company. This act was given the permission to spread Western education system in India. And this 1813 Charter Act was empowered the municipalities of Madras, Bombay and Bengal not only to impose the taxes, not only to collect the taxes, but also to punish the people who were not paying the taxes to the government. This is important thing. By 1793 Act, municipalities were empowered to impose taxes, but by 1813 Charter Act, the municipalities were empowered to punish the people who are not paying this. This is important thing. By 1793 Act, municipalities were empowered to impose taxes, but by 1813 Charter Act, the municipalities were empowered to punish the people who are not paying the taxes to the government. These are the important things of 1813 Charter Acts. In overall view, the summary is, it extended 20 years trade monopoly permission to the English East India Company, but it tried to abolish the trade monopoly of English East India Company, except trade with China and trade with tea. The Britishers were allowed to India to trade, except these two things. Thus, this act tried to abolish the monopolism of English East India Company in trade activities. First time, the Christian missionaries were allowed to enter India to promote Western education system and to promote Christianity. First time, 1 lakh rupee was sanctioned to the Indian education system to develop in budget of English East India Company, but it was actually came in force in 1930. First time, the native Indians were given the permission to get the jobs in English East India Company. And the municipalities of Madras, Bombay and Bengal were more empowered to punish the people who were not paying the taxes. This is a Charter Act 1813 summary. After 20 years, to extend or to abolish the trade monopoly of English East India Company, the British government enacted one more act, that is 1833 Charter Act. 1833 Charter Act. 1833 Charter has one more importance, his own impact on Indian political system. The key concepts of 1833 Charter Act were: it abolished the trade monopoly of the company. Trade monopoly of English East India Company. It made English East India Company only as an administrative body. It did not recognize it as a trade or merchant company. It completely abolished the trade and business activities of the company, including trade with China, including trade with tea, were also given the permission to the Britishers, any British individual, to trade in such areas. By the 1833 Act, completely the monopoly of English East India Company in trade was abolished. Any British people, any British company, any European company was given the permission to come India and to start any business activity, even business in tea, even business with China. In any area of trade and business activities, any British citizens, any British individual companies, any British private company were given the permission to come India. So thus, the monopoly of English East India Company was completely abolished by 1833 Act. But 1813, 90% of the trade monopoly of company was abolished. But by this act, 100% trade monopoly was abolished. You have to observe the difference. By 1813 Act, trade with China, trade with tea were only allowed to the East India Company. By this 1833 Act, even the two things were also liberalized to any British company. So, thus, 1833 Act abolished the trade monopoly of the company, and it extended permission to the English East India Company in India to continue for another 20 years. Not only as a trade company, but also as an administrative wing, but also as an administrative body. The English East India Company was given the permission. The permission was renewed. The permission was extended to continue its activities in India for another 20 years, from 1833 to 1853. So this is another important thing. One more important key concept of this act was, the 1833 Charter Act designates the Governor General of Bengal was Governor General of India. This is very, very important thing. It designates Governor General of Bengal as Governor General of India. It designates the Governor General of Bengal as Governor General of India. So this act, 1833 Charter Act, empowered the Governor General with more powers, and his designation was promoted as Governor General of Bengal to Governor General of India. The post Governor General of Bengal was promoted to Governor General of India. So to the whole part of India, the Governor General of India was the head of governance, head of the state. So Governor General of Bengal became Governor General of India as per this act. The first Governor General of India was William Bentinck. William Bentinck was the last Governor General of Bengal, but the first Governor General of India. You have to observe the difference. William Bentinck was the last Governor General of Bengal as well as the first Governor General of India. William Bentinck. This is one of the most important thing. So by this act, the company's trade monopoly was completely abolished, and the Governor General of Bengal was designated as Governor General of India. Governor General of India. All the military powers, all the revenue powers are vested in the name of Governor General of India. The Act 1833 Act completely abolished the trade activities of the company, and it made the English East India Company as only an administrative body. This act ended the trade activities of English East India Company and it recognized English East India Company only as an administrative body. Only as an administrative body. English East India Company was promoted only as an administrative body, and its trade activities, its business activities were completely ended by this act. So by this act, English East India Company became a powerful administrative wing in India. The administrative powers of the company was extended all over India, and the Governor General had given more powers overall India. One more important concept of this act is the number of Council of Ministers was increased again from 3 to 4. From 3 to 4. By Pitt's Act, the number was decreased from 4 to 3. Again by this 1833 Act, the number of Council of Ministers in the Council was increased from 3 to 4 again. For the first time of English East India Company's history, the Act was tried to introduce the open competition system in India, but the Council of Ministers was not approved that, so that it was not came into existence. The legislative powers of Madras Governor, the legislative powers of Bengal Governor, the legislative powers of Bombay Governor were deprived. All the legislative powers of 3 presidencies were transferred to the Governor General of India only. These are the important things of 1833 Act. 1. It ended the trade activities of company. It abolished the trade monopoly of the company. It given the permission to any British individual company to come India and to start their activities, business activities. It designated the Governor General of Bengal as Governor General of India. William Bentinck was the first Governor General of India. The legislative powers of Madras Presidency and Bombay Presidency were deprived. The legislative powers of those governors were transferred to the Governor General of India. This Act tried to introduce open competition system in India, but it was not came into existence. And this Act has its historical milestone by extension the powers of Governor General of Bengal as Governor General of India. This is Charter Act 1833. And the last Charter Act is 1853. That was the last Charter Act. 1853 Charter Act did not extend the permission to the company in India. It means the company would not continue so far in India, because the British government thought that the company would be replaced. 1853 Charter Act, the last Charter Act. This is the last Charter Act enacted by the British Parliament. It did not extend the permission. It did not extend the permission of English East India Company. It means English East India Company was going to disappear in India. Previous Charter Acts, all the previous Charter Acts were extended permission to the English East India Company for the period of 20 years. But for the first time, this 1853 Charter Act did not extended the permission to the English East India Company in India to continue. It means the company was not going to appear for more period. And this is the last Charter Act. The important things were, first time, the powers were distributed, or the powers of the Governor General of India were classified into 2, legislative and executive. For the first time, to enact the laws which are to be implemented across India has to be enacted only in India. To that, for the first time, the Central Legislative Council was set up by this Act. That's why a mini parliament was set up by this Act. Before 1853 Charter Acts, all the executive powers, all the legislative powers were vested in the name of Governor General. But for the first time, the legislative powers were separated from Governor General of Bengal. For the legislature process, a new legislature body was organized, that is Central Legislative Council, which is known as the mini parliament. It is very, very important. For the first time, the legislative powers were separated from the Governor General of India, from the Governor General of India to enact certain laws and acts which were applicable to India, a legislature body was set up by this act, that is Central Legislative Council. Central Legislative Council was set up to enact acts to the India. Before 1853, all the acts were enacted in British Parliament only. Before 1853, no act was enacted in India. All the acts were enacted, all acts were prepared and made and approved by British Parliament and enacted in England only. When the acts were enacted in England, after that they were implemented in India in the name of Governor General. But for the first time, a Central Legislative Council, which popularly known as Mini Parliament, was set up to enact acts to India. And these legislative powers were separated from the Governor General of India. That's why 1853 Charter Act introduced a legislature system to India. Important. It introduced legislature system in India. First time. The judicial system was introduced by the 1773 Regulating Act by setting up a Supreme Court at Fort William in 1774. And the legislature system was introduced by 1853 Act by separating the legislative powers from the Governor General and setting up a Central Legislative Council, which is popularly known as Mini Parliament. This is important thing you have to remember. Next. The number of Council of Ministers was raised from 3 to 4, and the fourth member could be a famous jurist. Here, Council of Ministers or Council of 4 was empowered with one jurist. The first jurist who became a member of Council of Ministers is Lord Macaulay. Lord Macaulay was the first jurist member of Council of Ministers. The number of Council of Ministers was raised to the 4, and the fourth member could be a jurist, and the first jurist of Council of Ministers was Lord Macaulay. In 1854, a law commission was set up by the British government to summarize the civil and criminal codes which were already implemented in India. Lord Macaulay was the head of such law commission. By this Act 1853, a law commission was set up by the chairmanship of Lord Macaulay to investigate and to summarize the civil and criminal codes already implementing in India from the ancient period. That was Lord Macaulay Committee. And Lord Macaulay Committee was suggested that to introduce the open competition system in India exclusively in civil services examinations. In 1854, open competition system was introduced in civil services examinations as per the recommendations of Macaulay Committee. Open competition system was first tried to introduce by 1833 Act, but it was not came into force. But it was came into existence by 1853 Charter Act. It was strictly recommended by the Lord Macaulay Committee. In 1854, the civil services examinations were first time held in a open competition system. Satyendranath Tagore was the first Indian civil service. Satyendranath Tagore was the first civil services candidate from India. Up to 1926, the civil services examinations were conducted in London only. From 1926 onwards, the civil services examinations were held to continue in India. Up to 1926, the civil services examinations were conducted only in England. Satyendranath Tagore was first Indian civil servant. And the open competition system in civil service examinations was started in 1854 by the recommendations of Lord Macaulay Committee. For the first time, by the 1853 Charter Act, it introduced the local representation in Central Legislative Council. For the first time, it tried to introduce the local representation in the Central Legislative Council. The Central Legislative Council was set up by this Act with 6 members. For the first time, you have to remember that one. It is very, very important. The Central Legislative Council was set up by this 1853 Act consisting of 6 members, and the local representation system also introduced in Central Legislative System. Of these 6 members of Central Legislative Council, the 4 members were nominated from Madras, Bombay, Bengal, and Agra. Central Legislative Council was set up in 1853 to enact the laws. It consisting of 6 members at first time. And of these 6 members, 4 persons were nominated from 4 presidencies: Bengal, Bombay, Madras and Agra. So the local representation system was introduced first time in Central Legislative Council. This is important thing. The local representation system was introduced by this act, and 4 persons were nominated from Bombay, Bengal, Madras and Agra to the Central Legislative Council. This is the summary of 1853 Charter Act and the last Charter Act.